All right, guys, the SEC has got some issues. They're 3-6 against Power 5 teams and 1-4 against the ACC. Welcome into Up to the Second College Football, Season 3, Episode 3, presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Academy Sports and Outdoors is your college football tailgate destination and official sports good and outdoor retailer of the SEC. Stop by your local Academy store or academy.com and gear up for game day today. All right, so on the show today, we're going to have ESPN's Aaron Murray on the program, the former Georgia quarterback. We're going to chit-chat about all things going on in the SEC, plus Billy and Caroline try to figure out what's going on everywhere because there's a lot of issues, and they'll have it all for you here on Up to the Second College Football.
Need a new grill? Academy Sports and Outdoors is the destination for your outdoor cooking needs. With our free in-store assembly and pre-assembled grills and smokers, buy online at academy.com and pick up in-store. So keep those grilling plans at Academy Sports and Outdoors.
All right, let's get some real analysis now. Aaron Murray, who obviously you see him on ESPN, former Georgia quarterback and good friend of the show. Aaron, what's up, man?
Man, how you doing? I would say how you doing, but I know how things are going down there in Texas world after a rocky little weekend.
Yeah, well, let's talk about it from an SEC perspective because kind of shocking to see how they've done. 1-4 against the ACC, 3-6 in Power 5 games out there. What has happened to our monstrous conference outside of Georgia?
Man, I'm still scratching my head a little bit right now as you kind of look at the landscape, especially the West. I looked at the West heading into the season, and you look at those rosters, you look at the talent, and I'm like, man, it is loaded from top to bottom. Like, could Auburn be a bad team? Yeah, first year head coach, they replace a lot, but then you look at the rest of the West. Like Mississippi State's a strong team with veteran leadership, even though they're going through a identity change on offense. Arkansas has KJ and Rocket, and Texas A&M is loaded with 4- and 5-star guys, and you look at the offense and the weapons and Wigman at quarterback, and obviously you have Alabama and LSU. It's just like, wow, like where's the hole? Ole Miss, good team with Lane, and then you've seen struggles for the first 2 weeks of the season, and that's just the West. And I'm not saying the East has been perfect. If the East is Kentucky has not looked as good as I thought they would. Joe Milton, first week looked good, like he's progressed. I thought he kind of went backwards this past weekend. Georgia hasn't played anyone, so you really don't know how elite they are. So yeah, I'm scratching my head right now, and the one thing that I can point to, because you look at the rest of the country and you wonder, like, why does the Pac-12 have 8 teams in the top 25? Why does the Big Ten look as good as they're looking, and why does the ACC look as good as they're looking? It's the quarterback position, and not just because I played the position, but it is the most important position out there. It's the highest paid position when it comes to, NIL, when it comes to the NFL. And you look at the SEC right now, and there's a lot of young guys that have talent, but there's not a superstar at the quarterback position right now. And I think that, to me, is what's holding this conference back, because there's great skill, there's great offensive line, there are good defenses, but there's not one quarterback that I can say right now is like, hey, that guy's a first-round NFL talent. Pac-12 has 3 or 4. ACC has 2 or 3. The Big Ten has a couple. The Big 12 has one with Ewers. So that's the big difference right now.
Aaron, I'm glad you brought up quarterback because as a A&M grad, fan, and analyst, I think they got the quarterback. Connor looks like the truth out there amongst all the other chaos defensively.
I was excited about him heading into the season like that. You look at Wigman and what he did last year towards the end of the season, and he's a tough SOB. I mean, watch him versus Miami. I mean, the respect level for in that locker room, I'm sure those guys already respect him and know him day in, day out, and he's going to continue to grow as a leader. But those are the type of games that take your respect to another level. And I remember, for me, I was a young quarterback. This was my freshman year, and we played Auburn on the road, and I got the dog knocked out of me, man. Like I joke, but like I was in the locker room after the game, like contemplating, like, can I actually play SEC football? Like, this is outrageous. I fractured sternum. I had 10 stitches put in my chin. I had whiplash in my neck. Like, I was all jacked up. And I remember after that, like, my linemen were like, dude, we'll never let that happen to you ever again. Like, it just the respect going forward was even on a different level for being a young quarterback on a veteran football team. And I think Wigman has now earned that respect. But when it comes to his talent, like, he's got the talent. And you look at some of the mistakes in the game, like guys were falling down, guys were slipping, some drop passes. Like, he's doing what he needs to do. And I think overall the offense, for the most part, is doing what they need to do. And I think we're in an interesting time right now, because I kind of said this to some Georgia fans too, where we think football all of a sudden should be played in the 50s. We think football should be in the 60s. Like we go crazy with these numbers. And if you're scoring 30 something points per game with the defensive players on Georgia, with the defensive players on Texas A&M, with the defensive players on Alabama, you should win those football games. Straight up. You should win those games. You should not have to be scoring 50 points a game to win with the amount of talent on those defenses for those teams in the SEC. So I'm not putting any blame on Wigman and the offense, the new scheme, or whatever. Can it be better? Yeah, it can always be better. It's early on the season. The defense was I mean honestly atrocious. I was just jawed to the ground because Tyler Van Dyke hasn't looked that good in 18 months.
Talking to Aaron Murray here on Up to the Second College Football. All right, let's talk Bama, Texas, because is it an announcement, hey, Texas, we're here, or is it an announcement, Bama, we're wounded, we're vulnerable, we've probably been wounded the last couple of years, but we had Bryce Young?
I think both, honestly. Like I said this all off season, people thought I was crazy. Like, man, this is Alabama's rebuild year. Like, I don't know why we thought, I mean, I guess I know why, because people always say, oh, it's Nick Saban, they reload. But you bring in two new offensive coordinators. You are changing your identity of your offense. You're young on both sides. You have a quarterback battle, which none of the guys seem to really, elevated their game to a point where they just took it. Like in any of that screams that this team's going to be elite. It's a bunch of young guys that need to play football and quarterbacks that right now I don't trust any of them at the moment. So I was looking at this team as a 9-3, 10-2 at best record, and it kind of goes back to my perception of what the SEC West was heading into the season. So, obviously surprised the way they lost. I would say that. Like, am I surprised Alabama lost? No, I I put money on Texas in the money line. I thought Texas was going to win the football game. Texas was a better team. I'm more surprised Alabama got beat up that bad at the line of scrimmage. That was the more surprising thing to me instead of them losing. That offensive line was, the inability to run the ball from like the second quarter on. They couldn't pass protect at all. Like, I know we want to blame Jalen for some of the interceptions, which were, they were really bad interceptions, but a lot of time he was running for his life. They got dominated up front. And then you look at the other side and in a Texas offensive line that, looked pretty average. I know it's a veteran group, but they looked average versus Rice, dominated the football game for Texas. I mean, they gave viewers all the time in the world to throw the football down the field. So that was more the wow moment of Alabama couldn't intimidate or scare anyone because they did a lot of talking, man. There was a lot of jabbering mouth. And I think that's something that should have concerned a lot of people too, because usually when Alabama beats your butt, they ain't talking. They ain't trying to psych themselves up. I feel like there was like this, we need to pump ourselves up and tell us how we need to say, tell the world that we are so strong and we're so big and we're so tough and this, that, and the other. It's like, just play. Alabama's never had to toot their own horn, and they got punched in the mouth and they couldn't punch back. So I think it's a really good football team. They're not elite this year. And I do think Texas is good enough to win a championship.
Aaron, I think you hit on something there. What you said about Bama, I think you can say the same thing about the way LSU lost and the way A&M lost. And not that anybody, look, Florida losing to Utah in week 1 wasn't that surprising, but no Cam Rising, the way they lost. That's maybe what it's been my biggest takeaway about the SEC is the way they're losing.
Yeah, they're losing in the trenches, which is something that we're not used to seeing in this league because this league recruits bigger, stronger guys. But I mean, look, Sark, over the past 3 years, what has he done? And what's given me confidence about the Texas this year is, we knew he was going to have a good offense. He knew, receivers, quarterbacks, all that, and he went to the portal and got AD Mitchell to add to that receiving core. But he's built a dominant front seven on defense, and he's put together a veteran-led offensive line that's really good as well. Like, he understands you got to win the line of scrimmage if you're going to win football games, and that's our identity. You look at FSU, same thing with Verse on the outside on defense. You look at what they did on the offensive line as well. Like, that's a team that can win the offensive line and defensive line. And then go to another team that kind of, another big boy, I guess you can say, that has dominated physically is Clemson. And then, why did Clemson lose to Duke? Well, they didn't win the battle up front. Duke was the more physical team in that football game. So I don't know if it's just we thought we had really good guys and they just haven't developed like we want, or maybe we lost some guys in the portal, whatever it is. But man, some of these big brands that traditionally are the powerful teams are just lacking in that category this year.
Aaron, I want to do one thing that is not SEC related because I think it's such an intriguing story. It's the Deion arc. Because you look at Deion Sanders, what he's doing at Colorado. Like myself, I found myself kind of rooting against him during the offseason. And then strangely, in the middle of the TCU games, rooting for him because it's kind of an inspiring story, even though maybe I didn't like the way he went about it. But that dude, at least so far, has backed it up.
He is. It's a really good football team. I am because we just talked about, like, we've seen some soft play. We've seen some undisciplined play across the country, like Alabama with some penalties, just all over the place. Like, you're trying to feel like, okay, it looks like week 1 and week 2 of the season, where honestly, like, you look at Colorado and you would think if there's any team that would have all these penalties or turnovers or miscues on both sides of the football, it would be a team that was essentially put together like an expansion football team 6 months ago. And they've been one of the cleanest football teams I've watched all season. Like, it is very efficient what they're doing on both sides. So, I mean, that to me is like, wow, bam. Like, if you could put together a team in 6 months or 6 months ago and have them play at this level, that just shows you the kind of coaching that they've been going through, from spring, summer, and into fall camp to begin the season off. So, kudos to Deion for getting his team playing fundamentally sound football. And then you look at their skill. And it starts with the quarterback position, something that we talked about the SEC struggling right now. Shedeur Sanders is maybe the second best quarterback in that conference. And I actually think he is the second best quarterback in that conference behind Caleb Williams. He does everything you want. And the also thing that should excite scouts is the fact that he has shown he can handle the pressure, because all the attention's on him. You're Deion's son. Did you get the job because you're Deion's son? Did you really earn it? Have you proven, that you could play at a high level? And he came in there with this chip on his shoulder, not afraid of the moment, and has been one of the best quarterbacks in America through the first 2 weeks of the season. I have been so impressed by that young man and the receiving talent around him. It's a good football team. It's a really good football team. The only thing that you worry about with Colorado is you look at their schedule, and I think there's about 6 or 7 teams ranked in the Pac-12 that they have to face the rest of the season. So it's going to be a gauntlet for sure. But this is a bowl team.
Aaron, I want to close out because I've become a big fan of snaps with you and T-Bob. Just how much fun do you have doing that?
I love it, man. T-Bob keeps me on my toes every single day. He'll go on some wild tangent about God knows what, and we have a good time. So make sure you go check us out on YouTube at Snaps at the Volume. Got some great support from Colin Cowherd and his team to help build us, and we're looking for a strong season. So we appreciate you with that little shout out right there.
Yeah, make sure everybody goes and follows it. Aaron, thanks so much, man. Love watching your work on ESPN and, of course, on Snaps with Aaron and T-Bob. Thanks again, buddy. We'll do it soon, all right?
Appreciate you having me on.
At Academy Sports and Outdoors, bikes for the whole family are just a click away. Buy online at academy.com with our free in-store assembly. Your next set of wheels, plus helmets, pads, and water bottles will be waiting for you at our in-store pickup counter. Get to the fun faster with our in-store pickup and free assembly at Academy Sports and Outdoors.
All right, our thanks to Aaron Murray. Now we go to Billy and Caroline Fenton, who've got a lot of questions to answer when it comes to the SEC, like what's happening to Alabama? Is Texas moving in, being one of those hot teams next year? We'll talk all about it here with Billy and Caroline.
Welcome into Up to the Second, presented by our friends over at Academy. I'm Caroline Fenton. He's Billy Liucci, and every week we look ahead to the SEC slate of games. We look back at the best performers, and we start with our teams. I'm an LSU Tiger, and of course, he's an Aggie. So I feel like I need to start with you, Billy, after that week 2 performance at Miami.
I mean, look, you guys lost to the state of Florida school in Orlando week 1. The Aggies go out and a little bit further south week 2 and get beat by the Miami Hurricanes. Not the way I think either fan base, either coaching staff, either group of players drew it up. I think Florida State's better than Miami, but kind of a similar setup there in that LSU led a close game at halftime. The Aggies led a close game for 29 minutes and 55 seconds and then trailed 21 seconds. Both close games at halftime. Both of the Florida teams pulled away really in the second half. I know A&M tried to make a game of it late, but, a really, really tough loss for Jimbo Fisher and the Aggies. And I think it wasn't that unexpected per the line and A&M playing on the road early. That's the reason why everyone was interested to see what happened. But I think really unexpected for the folks on that maroon and white sideline. That was a game I think they really thought they were going to go in and win and set the season off on the right track. And Caroline, much like your LSU Tigers, what is it, 4 years in a row you've lost the opener?
4 years in a row, dating back to 2020.
Texas A&M has lost game 2 5 out of the last 6 years. So it for two fan bases with such high expectations, I know LSU has accomplished so much more here in the last 20-plus years with the national titles. But both fan bases have such high expectations. There's such a high level of commitment. And to take those setbacks so frequently, so early, it definitely, I think the 12th man is going through what the folks over, in Baton Rouge were going through a week ago, where it's just kind of frustration sets in. And if you're in that locker room, all you got to do is, look, same deal. LSU bounced back against Grambling.
Mm-hmm.
A&M is about to try to bounce back against another directional Louisiana school in ULM. These are not that different.
I will use the same word to describe LSU's loss against Florida State, and it's sobering. Yeah. Because I was very high on Texas A&M, and I still am. Like, one bad game against Miami is not going to, make me pour out my maroon Kool-Aid, if you will.
Yes, I think Alyssa Lang said the same thing this morning.
Yeah, it wasn't a good game. It wasn't a good look, but I think it's a get back moment of, okay, we were riding high. It's the same thing with LSU, top 5 team going into the season. Hey, maybe we're just not as good as we thought we were, or maybe we just played a really good team. And to go along with the similarities between that LSU Florida State game and the Texas A&M Miami game, one, the quarterback was not the problem. Like, Connor Wigman gave A&M the best chance to win on Saturday against Miami, as I believe Jaden Daniels did against Florida State.
Right.
And two, I think we're both coming out of those games with a lot of concerns about the secondary.
Right.
I mean, so A&M secondary had no business looking as bad as they looked against Miami.
Yeah, that's so funny. You say it is very, and they also both got beaten by really good veteran quarterbacks. And both teams, Caroline, had real question marks in the secondary going into the season. It was one of the things that I talked about all offseason. When you cover just one team like I do, you catch a lot of flack even from the own fan base, because there are haters out there that they don't want to listen to what's being said, because if it's negative and you're not yelling and screaming it and calling for people's jobs and saying people suck, they don't hear it. I said all summer, all offseason, the A&M secondary was a concern. Just like you and people covering LSU said about the LSU secondary. And both of them got exposed, but they also both got exposed by what scared me going into this game was Van Dyke playing for Shannon Dawson of that Dana Holgerson tree. They're going to throw it around. They're going to sling it and get the ball out of his hands. And obviously LSU ran into a Heisman contender at quarterback. But
right.
The wrong teams to go into a game with question marks in your secondary. Let's put it that way. Now, Florida State, I didn't see any Keon Coleman at Miami, but the Restrepo kid's pretty damn good. But you're right. Secondaries got exposed. And how do you feel watching that game, though? Do you feel like the issues can be fixed moving forward in terms of, do you think that was a scheme thing or a bad day thing, or were you watching that game going, they might need to revisit some personnel things back there?
A&M?
Yeah.
I looked at it, and I look at this A&M roster, and I said it last week, and I stand by it. There might only be 2 games on A&M's schedule, and even that might be a stretch where they might just be, out-talented. And that might be Alabama, it might be LSU, but also, I think those teams are also evenly matched because they've all got a ton of talent. The amount of talent on A&M's defensive line, they had no business letting Tyler Van Dyke do what he did on Saturday. I have to put that on coaching, and I have to put that on scheme.
Yeah.
I think the good thing about that is scheme is a lot easier to fix in the middle of the season than just getting better players, simply. True. So I think that might be a kind of a wake-up call of, look, what we're doing isn't working, and we'll have time to fix it, and we've got a get-right game this weekend against UL Monroe to be able to do that. The same instance that LSU had last weekend against Grambling, and now a big test against Mississippi State.
I talked a lot. I want to dive into that game and a couple others in the SEC, but I talked I talked a lot this past week about LSU last year, and I think you and I talked about it, and you came on, and we were even texting during that game. LSU looked terrible in the opener last year against Florida State. And Florida State
rancid.
And Florida State was not supposed to be very good either. I know Aggies don't want to hear that, but that is an example to go back to and look, because that LSU team last year, that's not a vintage Les Miles loaded talent team. They're really good. That's not a Les Miles, I have the best players in the country this side of Tuscaloosa. That's not a Nick Saban LSU team last year. That was a good team that just fought you. They got smoked by a bad A&M team. They got blitzed at home by Tennessee, and they looked really bad that opener, and they looked up, and they beat Alabama, and they won the West. So it is not an impossible comparison to make, and I think that's where A&M, you just got to monitor this team very closely in the next couple weeks, particularly Auburn and Arkansas to open SEC play, to get a better feel with, is this a team that has anything to it, or were they once again overrated entering a season? So we'll wait and see there. But before we go into LSU, Mississippi State, and the other 2 games, what to make, Caroline, of the SEC? I've been covering the league now for 12 years, and I don't think I've ever seen, ironically enough, maybe that very first year A&M was in the conference, I thought, when I'm watching A&M play these teams, and Arkansas was really bad. Mississippi State was all right. Ole Miss was in year 1 under Hugh Freeze. They had lost like 15 SEC games in a row. Auburn was the worst Auburn team ever. It was the year that, what's his name, got fired. Chiswick. The year Chiswick got fired. That was the worst Auburn team ever. I think they were 3-9.
Oof.
The league was not way up that year. And a lot of it had to do with quarterback. I'm watching SEC football, and it has not been that impressive. And then way more important than that, than the eyeball test, is they're losing out at conference games at a clip that I haven't seen. What do you make of these early season setbacks? And is this just a straight up, it's going to be a down year to the SEC, which might be fun as far as the conference races go, I guess?
The SEC's best out-of-conference win through 2 weeks is Ole Miss's win at Tulane, a group of 5 team that was playing its backup quarterback.
Oh, wow. You're right.
Like, that just puts it into perspective.
Right.
Tennessee bullied up on a bad Virginia team. Auburn just barely squeaked by against Cal.
They're ready to give up football over there.
I mean, Mississippi State went to overtime with Arizona.
Yeah.
I mean, even the non-conference games that the SEC is winning, the SEC teams don't look very good doing it. And I think the biggest, most telling thing for me in the games, the big-time non-conference, the LSU, Florida States, the Texas, Alabamas, those kind of games, is that the SEC teams that are known for being physical, to being tough at the line of scrimmage, and having some of the best quarterbacks in the league, they're getting out-physicaled, and they're getting out-toughed, and they're getting outplayed by simply just better quarterbacks. Like, I went on a radio hit this morning, and they asked me, is the SEC down? I was like, yes, of course.
Right?
Yes, the SEC is down, and I think it all comes back to quarterback play.
Yeah.
And you could look at, this is a transitional year for a lot of teams with the starting quarterback position. And I think also, with the transfer portal and in NIL, my question was always, will the big get bigger? Will this level the playing field? Looking at just 2 weeks of a sample size in this season, the season has shown us that it has leveled the playing field. Look at Colorado.
Yep.
I mean, the fact that we're talking about Colorado as college football playoff contender, I think goes to show that what Deion Sanders did in the transfer portal proves that this is leveling the playing field. And it's not just the Alabamas and the A&Ms and the LSUs and the Michigans and the Ohio States that are getting the 4- and 5-star recruits across the country. So, yes, this is a down year for the SEC, but I think that's a positive thing for 2 reasons. One, you mentioned it. This makes these divisional races really fun.
Yeah.
Because I thought, watching LSU in that week 1 game, I thought, great. All right, this is a team that's not going to win a lot of games. Throw the West out the window. Right. And then Alabama lost to Texas and A&M lost to Miami. And I thought, okay, you can drop a game or 2 and you could still win this division. I think the other side of that, too, is it makes college football more fun.
Yeah.
It's hard to swallow as, lovers and homers of the SEC. But I think that outside of the Southeastern Conference, like on the West Coast, for example, they've probably checked out of college football for a majority of the last few years, just simply because what's the fun in not winning? What's the fun in not being in the conversation? So you got 8 teams from the Pac-12 in the top 25. The SEC is 0-4 against ACC teams, just brutal. But I think parity overall is a good thing in the sport, even if it comes at the expense of our beloved SEC.
Well, a lot of it on the A&M side, and people think Aggies they're overly worried about Texas. And I always say, no, if you're a Texas A&M fan, or if you're the coach at A&M or the athletic director, and I've had conversations with coaches and ADs that have been here where I'm like, they get here and they go, why is everyone? I say, no, you don't need to put your focus on Texas. And I would talk to Woodward about this, and you don't need to focus on them. But if you can keep your foot on them and keep them down, you need to do that. And here's why. We just saw it. So now when Texas is as good as they are this year and they look it, and I'm not saying they're going to run through it, but they might. But when they're that good, you watch that recruiting machine get rolling there in Austin, which it already is, and they've got the power of NIL. Because like A&M, they're one of the few teams that can really just stand out in terms of the pouring in the money thing on that front. Yeah. They're up there at the top. So you have that and a win over Alabama and that momentum. I always say with Texas, when they get near the finish line, the entire sports media in this country tries to push them over the edge. You look at Pat McAfee, you watch SportsCenter, you watch College Game Day. It's like they're just begging teams like Texas and USC to be back. Miami, they're begging for these teams to be back. It's not always the case with everyone else. So Colorado's getting that benefit now with Deion Sanders. It's
the star power of Deion.
It's what it is, and that's why he was such a great hire for them. But when I'm looking around the SEC right now, it doesn't matter as much to me that the league dominates, because there's only going to be a couple leagues anyway here pretty soon, and then Texas is joining. So for A&M's recruiting purposes, a.k.a. their ability to survive and thrive, you loved having that massive advantage over Texas where you could just say, hey, we're in the best league there is. There ain't anything close. It was a huge advantage. Did A&M capitalize? No, not really, other than they do have a loaded roster as a result of the move. But that was kind of what was giving them an advantage. But now that that's kind of washed, Texas is coming in. I don't know what to ask you about that game, because we're going to try to rip through these ones coming up. Texas, Alabama, were you surprised? And after watching Bama, what is your win-loss prediction for them in SEC play this year?
I wasn't surprised.
Me neither.
And maybe that's a little bit depressing about where the league is right now, because I said going into that game, Texas is going to take away the run. And I don't believe in Jalen Milroe being able to throw himself to a victory.
Yep.
Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong, Jalen Milroe.
Yep.
And he wasn't able to do that. He was careless with the football. The offensive line couldn't protect him worth a lick. the Alabama defensive line couldn't get pressure on the Texas offensive line. Overall, I mean, Texas was the better, more physical, and better coached team.
Yeah.
And how weird is that Steve Sarkisian, who has not won before this game a single big game in his career at Texas, walks into Bryant-Denny Stadium, where one, Nick Saban doesn't lose, unless it was to that 2019 LSU team. Let's not forget that. And where Nick Saban doesn't lose to his former assistants. And he wins in that fashion.
It's funny you say that.
That was a statement win for Texas.
It's funny you say coaching. Is Steve Sarkisian a better coach than Nick Saban? Of course not.
No.
Steve Sarkisian versus Tommy Rees on the OC level, it ain't even close.
Yeah.
And Texas fans will hear me say that and say, you said Petrino was better than Sark. I think Petrino's resume was as good going into the season. Now, Quinn Ewers is light years better than Jalen Milroe. And I think Quinn will have – they better watch out because Quinn will have some stinker games where he's very inaccurate. And if it happens against the wrong Big 12 team, they'll get upset. But Ewers is light years better than Milroe. And I think that here's the other thing. And this is where I credit what Sark's done, and they've done a lot of it through NIL, and they've done a lot of it through he knew what he had to do to move into the SEC. Their D-line was better than Alabama's, and their O-line was better than Alabama's. That's it. They were better on both lines of scrimmage. You had a better play caller, and you had a better quarterback. And oh, by the way, you have better receivers. I think A&M's got better receivers than Alabama. This is where Bama has changed, Caroline, is I think their skill guys have gotten progressively. I watched Haynes King play better than Milroe last year. That was with Will Anderson. And Jahmyr Gibbs carried that game, and A&M took them to the final play. Bama, and I don't know what Kevin Steele was doing because Sark schooled him. I've never seen Bama DB so far away from the football. I think, Caroline, they have come, and they might win the West. If you made me pick a team to win the West, I still think I'd probably pick them. I think they might win it at 6-2. But I've watched them do this from having 4 first-round receivers, and it's just there's no Will Anderson out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, those giant D tackles. What's my man's name with the Jets? Quinnen Williams.
Williams, yeah.
Those guys aren't there in their front seven line, and I know they're still as good as anyone in the SEC. They're not, though, because there's Georgia. But those dudes aren't there. And what's happened is he's had a lot of coaching turnover. About 3 or 4 of them are at Texas right now. Mm-hmm. And they've come down to the top of the pack. It's the pack. It's the top of the pack, but they've come down. They got passed by Georgia. I think they go 6-2 again in the SEC. What do you think about their record in this league?
Yeah, I think they still very easily could win the West, but I don't think that that's going to justify, this Alabama team being an Alabama team.
Yeah.
Like, if they do win the West, I'll step away from it and I'll say, okay, but you still, you didn't have those playmakers that we could go back on every Nick Saban coach team and say, oh, there was Jerry Jeudy, there was Jalen Waddle, there was Mark Ingram, there was Julio Jones, there was Bryce Young, there was Will Anderson.
Their worst running back was like Bo Scarborough. Like he was like
exactly.
It was like there was Derrick
Henry.
So it's crazy to me watching it. They had some creatures. Texas fans they won't and credit them for winning that game. They look great. They look great. I don't think it was as close. Like the fact that I looked up and Bama led, I was shocked. But that is not, and people think this is an Aggie talking. You can ask anyone that covers this league that is not the typical Bama team that we have seen in the last 15 years. And Texas fans can go back to when they played them in the national title game, and that's when it started. And it's looked like that and better up until about 2 years ago. So they're not a part of one of the big games this weekend. Neither is A&M, but your LSU Tigers are. Mississippi State, like you said, they went to overtime against Arizona. I'm questioning that deal too. It's 2 games in without Mike Liucci. I like Arnett. He seems like a guy you'd root for. How do you think that game goes? Because that's been a defining one, I feel like, more than a couple times for LSU since I've been following this conference.
Yeah. And then to answer your
usually
question,
early, right?
Right. It's usually early. And I think Alabama could go 7-1. I think the floor is 4-4.
Wow.
I think most likely is 6-2. Okay. But to answer your question about LSU, Mississippi State, this is a game that LSU wins. Mm-hmm. Like, there are just games every year on LSU's schedule, like Arkansas, like Ole Miss, Mississippi State is the same. You win those games. And no, LSU hasn't beaten them every single year. But as an LSU fan, you look at those to be, the games that you win, and then the questions are Auburn, A&M, Alabama. Mm-hmm. So if you can't win those games, I don't want to call them gimmies because I feel like that's disrespectful.
Well, you're talking, anyway. A&M fans are listening. We think they're 500 against the Mississippi schools. They own Arkansas, though.
Yeah, right. And those are just games that you expect to win. And if you can't win those games, then you have some serious questions about how good this team is. Because the question is no longer, can you beat Alabama? The question is, are you going 7-5? Like, if you can't beat Mississippi State, what can you accomplish in this league? And look, that's no disrespect to Mississippi State, but look at the history. And it's a first-year head coach in Zach Arnett that's bringing a new offensive system. Credit to Will Rogers, because I feel like, he's gone from an air raid system where he's throwing the ball 50 times a game, where he's putting up 350 to 400 yards through the air every game, to now he's throwing the ball like 16 times a game, and he's putting up like 150, 200 yards through the air. But he's gone through that transition, I think, really gracefully. Mm-hmm. And I look at Jaquavius Marks, and he might just be one of the best running backs in the SEC once we get more into SEC matchups and he starts to become a little bit more of a household name.
Yeah.
But the Will Rogers' ability to do both, to hand the ball off, run the football, to throw the football, that concerns me as an LSU fan, with a defense that feels a little bit in limbo, a secondary that's a question mark, Harold Perkins trying to get situated into this new role where we saw him play a good bit on the outside against Grambling, but they still want him to develop as an inside linebacker. Mason Smith getting back into the mix, and you could tell against Grambling there was some rust there, and he hasn't played a full game in almost 2 years.
Sure.
So it's a defense that has a lot of talent, and I think it's a defense at the end of the season will look a lot better than it does now. But it is one of those games that, in terms of confidence for the fan base, for this team as a whole, you need to go in and you need to beat Mississippi State, and you need to be able to do it handedly.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is it's like you said, it's one you can't go 1-2 and 0-1 in the SEC in a year where expectations are that high. And like you said, you're not playing Georgia or Bama or even Tennessee out of the East. Another big game this weekend, Tennessee. First, LSU wins the game outside of Jaden Daniels. Mm-hmm. Who has to perform? We're talking about an LSU win next week, who are we talking about outside of Jaden Daniels? Is it that secondary? Is there a skill position guy you're looking at to have a big game against the Bulldogs?
I'll give you 2, offensively and defensively. Defensively, it needs to be Harold Perkins.
Okay.
Harold Perkins needs to have a big game. He needs to get after the quarterback. And I think that we all need to see a Harold Perkins flying around on the outside when he literally has the entire field at his disposal and he can do whatever the heck he wants. That's when he's at his best.
Yeah.
I think offensively, a name that probably haven't heard is Logan Diggs.
Okay.
He's a transfer running back from Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. Started his career with Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. LSU has such a deep running back room, but the run game didn't look good against Florida State.
Yeah.
It was against Grambling, so take it with a grain of salt. But Logan Diggs looked like the most explosive and powerful running back on this LSU team. And LSU is a team that always has good running backs. Mm-hmm. He looked to be like the next one in line of the great LSU running backs. Ran for over 100 yards against Grambling. So I think that he's going to get a good bit of touches against Mississippi State, and I think that he's going to headline that run game.
Tennessee, Florida. Do the Gators have a chance in the Swamp? That's in the Swamp, right? I didn't even look
In the
up
Swamp, yeah.
Do they have a chance down there to win at home? They didn't look good against Utah. Same Utah team that kind of took a miracle to beat Baylor a week later. And that's a Wolf Baylor team too, who got drilled by Texas State the week before. So it's kind of got you going, how good is Utah before Cam Rising is back to normal doing his thing. Right. So, and they handled Florida. Does Florida have a chance? Tennessee, that's a weird. I was busy. Obviously, Saturday you go to these games and you're in an Uber getting there and you're at the stadium. And then I look up today and I'm watching. I know was it 10-6 at halftime over Austin Peay?
It was maybe.
It was 13-6 in the third quarter.
I think it may have been up 13 at the half.
Yeah,
I know they weren't leading until the end of the first quarter.
Yeah. No, it was kind of an eye-opening score for sure. Can Florida knock them off? I'm picking Tennessee in this one, but are there reasons for concern for Josh Heupel that this thing isn't necessarily? And if it doesn't, it's understandable, and that's what I think. Yeah. Tennessee fans might not realize, but are there reasons for Heupel to be concerned that hey, maybe this is a regroup year? I mean, he's not going to think that, but I mean, could Tennessee not be able to sustain that momentum just seamlessly, and they have to kind of get it figured out here early in the season?
I think they could absolutely lose this game.
Really?
Not with you. I'm picking Tennessee to win because Tennessee is the better team, and Tennessee has more talent in the roster right now. But, I mean, Joe Milton has struggled, and he has struggled mightily. I mean, against Austin Peay this past week, he couldn't hit a receiver. It was an underthrow. It was an overthrow. It was inaccuracy. And Joe Milton's been in college football for close to 37 years now. Yeah. And if he still is struggling with accuracy, I think that what you see is what you get with Joe Milton.
Caroline.
And part of it's on the receivers as well.
I noticed that, and I didn't see anyone talking about it because his end of game was good, and they finally just kind of surged. I noticed that throughout the first half against Virginia, too. He's throwing those out routes into the ground, and then he's throwing the ones across the middle, and they're sailing high over everybody's head. Accuracy is absolutely an issue with Joe Milton. So I think that's an interesting game. I think we both agree, though. I think Tennessee, I think Florida's going to really struggle this year. I think they're one of those that they're going to have a rough go of it. We'll see, but I think Napier is going to have it's going to be a tough one in Gainesville.
It's going to be a tough year for sure. I hope they give him time because he didn't really inherit the greatest roster.
He did not. And then that third one this weekend is South Carolina and Georgia. I remember a few years ago it was a big birthday celebration, and I'd been to Oxford about 20 times, and I ended up going to Vegas that week. It's one of the rare road games, conference-wise, I didn't go to. So we go there and, watch the A&M Ole Miss game. Aggies pulled out late. But I remember earlier that day seeing Jake Fromm throw 3 picks. I think 3 picks to the same guy. He throws 3 interceptions to South Carolina corner, and the Gamecocks beat Georgia. And that was when Georgia was ranked really high. I think that was Artie Kirby. They were ranked really high. It was a huge upset. Can Shane Beamer, Spencer Rattler, and the Gamecocks knock off Georgia? Because the only reason I feel like I'm asking this is South Carolina hasn't been very impressive. Georgia has looked a little vulnerable early in games and slow starting on offense, which has to be a concern for Kirby Smart in their first game against, a real team and a conference foe.
I'd be concerned if I was Kirby, if I was a Georgia fan. Now, look, it's the same thing. Georgia just has more talent than South Carolina, but also this is Carson Beck's inaugural year as the starting quarterback. Yeah. And this is only week 3. I think that in the first 2 weeks, there have been some good things. There have been some bad things. I do think overall, he looks like he has a solid grasp of this offense. But this is his first big test.
Yeah.
It's at home. So I think that gives advantage Georgia, that you're not going to be in a rowdy Williams-Brice.
True.
But it's an experienced veteran Spencer Rattler that has looked better, in the last 4 games, going back to last year against Clemson, against against Tennessee late in the season, in the first couple of games this season. Spencer Rattler has seemed to just figure it out, or maybe the coordinators have figured out what makes Spencer Rattler tick. So you've got an experienced guy in Spencer Rattler versus Carson Beck, who is still kind of working through kinks and without Ladd McConkey and still trying to figure out what the identity of this offense is. So that would concern me as far as Georgia is concerned. I'm still picking Georgia in this one, but it's hard for me to feel confident about that pick just because we haven't seen this Georgia team be really tested yet.
Interesting that Georgia's going to play a game where the opponent, South Carolina, has a significant advantage. I think they've got a significantly better quarterback in Rattler. That can kind of be a great equalizer, but the ultimate equalizer, I think, is defense. And maybe if that game was at Williams-Brice, I'd feel a little bit different, and I'd be predicting a very close football game. But I think Georgia's just got too much. I think they'll just gradually pull away in this one and probably look pretty impressive in doing so. I don't think it's going to be like 2021 or 2022 Georgia, that type of impressive, but I think they'll just kind of pull away. They're a superior outfit in this one, let's say.
But I don't think that Georgia is infallible this year. I mean, even last year, coming off of a national championship season, they struggled against Missouri.
Yeah.
And they struggled against Penn State.
Lost to Missouri.
Almost lost to Missouri, and that's with a veteran Stetson Bennett. And maybe that was more a factor of Georgia overlooking Missouri rather than Missouri actually being a competitive team. But I don't think that Georgia's untouchable. I wouldn't be surprised if they have a skid on their schedule this season just simply because it's a bad day for a good team. I don't think that day comes in their first SEC opponent.
Agreed. I predicted this summer that Georgia would lose a game and win the national title. I still feel like they'll lose a game. I'm not feeling as good about that national title prediction because there are some teams out there that could make some. If there's going to be a year, the three-peat thing, Georgia's going to have to look better because the last 2 Georgia teams and maybe the last 3 or 4, I think would cruise to this year's Natty. I think they were from the teams.
Oh yeah,
there's not a lot of great football teams. But this year's Georgia is again, they're not. Those other Georgia teams, I think, would without question beat this one. So everybody at the top has kind of done this, and everybody in that second level, not everybody, but some of them have come up, and it's created this really interesting dynamic that we touched on earlier. But I think college football is going to be pretty exciting this year. Start, and then you start conference play around the country this week, and it'll be even more interesting.
I think I could even make a stronger case for either Florida State or Texas being the number 1 team in the country than I could for Georgia.
Based on what they've done?
Based on the resumes this season and based on, returning quarterbacks and the, new quarterback factor, new offensive coordinator factor at Georgia. And I get it. I understand Georgia hasn't done anything to drop from 1, but Texas and Florida State in the context of the 2023 season have proven more to me. But wrapping up our thoughts, what do you need to see from A&M this weekend?
Oh, I need to see them just come out and play sharp early and don't look like they have a hangover. I don't want to see a team that looks like they're feeling sorry for themselves. Come out and I want to feel like they're refocused and they're enjoying playing football still and they don't get in the doldrums over one game. And I'd like to see DJ Durkin on defense examine a lot of different things in terms of personnel. Play more guys. Not play more, but play more early. Play more guys with the first team. Play more guys in the first and second quarter. And see who flashes. Whether they're young guys, whether they're veterans. Tinker with that pass rush. Maybe get more of those speed, twitchy guys on the field on third down. And then I think offensively, I'd like to see A&M kind of continue to get that running game established. I like what I saw from Amari Daniels. Le'Veon Moss was out last week. They've got the 5-star freshman Reuben Owens, who made a couple plays in the passing game. I'd like to see them get that thing going to maybe get that offensive line some more confidence that they're allowed to, and that they can get off and fire off the line and knock people off the ball, because I thought they got beat pretty badly against Miami at the line of scrimmage in the run game. So I want to see them improve that and look more like that team that I saw play LSU a year ago, because they're all the same guys. So that'll be what I look for. And real quick, top 3 player of the years.
Yes.
I don't know who to go with right now.
And it's not a matter of, wow, there's so many players to choose from.
That's the problem.
It's a matter of who deserves it.
I've got Connor Wigman at 3 right now for me. He impressed the hell out of me Saturday. He was the most pressured quarterback in college football last week per PFF. I know he threw 2 picks. One of them was a 4th down desperation heave in the final minute. The other one was a play where Anais Smith just slipped and fell down. It was a perfect throw. Anais was going to make it catch. And he threw for 336, had 2 touchdowns, had about 35 yards rushing. And I just thought stood in there in the face of some real pressure and almost let A&M back. If they could have got the ball back, he'd have got it back. They were 1 play away from giving it back to him down 8. So I go Wigman at 3.
Wigman's on my list as well. And I'm adding another quarterback to my list, and that's Jackson Dart.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that 2022 Jackson Dart beats 2023 Tulane. But Jackson Dart really had to win that game for Ole Miss. Like, Quinton Judkins did not in that game and really has not done anything too flashy, not the explosive plays. He has been carrying this team like he did in so many games last year. That was the Jackson Dart game. And I think we're going to look back on it and say Jackson Dart single-handedly beat Tulane when they were not looking very good in the first half. So with the improvements he's made every year, I've been impressed with what Jackson Dart has done. But I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know if I can pick a third. Like, I don't know who really stood out against quality opponents.
I mean, you almost look at, like, Marks. They played, it's 2 games they've played.
Marks. Yeah.
They've played nobody, and they've played Arizona. I kind of want to keep Will Rogers in there because, like you said, they're asking him to do less, but he had a really efficient game. I think it was 3 touchdowns, no picks. Maybe it was 2. I think it was 3 touchdowns, no picks. He completed 75% of his passes. They were easy throws, though. But I'll probably keep him on that list as well. I guess I'm going to keep KJ Jefferson on there and go all quarterbacks, but it's not. We'll start to see some names emerge. We'll start to see some names emerge this week when you start getting conference games and you start getting. I'll tell you who else is not far off that list for me would be Evan Stewart. I mean, A&M's going to have for A&M to have 2 guys, they'd have to start winning some big games. But Evan is second or leads the country in receptions per game, and he's 5th in the country in yards per game. So he's off to a great start, but he's off the list for now because it'd be hard to put two Aggies when they've beaten New Mexico and lost their only true test. So wide open SEC race. And like you said, there's not a lot of skill guys really standing out, and that's part of the reason why they've lost these games.
And you said it. Once we get conference opponents, and once we get to the point where there are going to be individual skill players that have to step up to beat conference opponents, that's when I think they'll start to separate each other from the pack. But an SEC that has been unimpressive in non-conference play, it's tough to single out those guys. Hey,
you know who would be atop the SEC list right now in these Player of the Year things? It would be Quinn Ewers. It would be Xavier Worthy. It would be Keon. It would be Keon Coleman. It would be Hunter at Florida State, Travis Hunter.
It would be Drake May.
It would be Drake May. It would be Van Dyke at Miami. You see where I'm going with that?
Sure.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they didn't beat a big SEC team. I'm saying all these guys that would be on there are the guys that beat SEC teams. Yeah, so it's not the SEC skill guys going off. It's the teams playing against SEC defenses. That's pretty interesting, probably pretty alarming over there in Birmingham. But Caroline, take us home. You got a birthday dinner to cook.
I do have a birthday dinner to cook, but here's hoping that the non-conference schedule is a lot more flattering for the SEC this week, considering that there is not a whole lot of tough opponents on there.
Yeah.
But we'll have a full breakdown on next week's edition of Up to the Second. For Billy Liucci, I'm Caroline Fenton. We'll see y'all next week.